everything that has happened up to now has led to you being here. You remember that? Same thing happened on that fateful day in that backyard. You see, when I was a younger man, I was in the Boy Scouts, and I learned how to do CPR. Now, if you don't know how to do CPR, let me encourage you to learn, because I'm a living example that you never know when that skill is going to come in handy. So the first thing I did, I ran off of the patio, I dove headfirst into their pool, and I scooped the body of my little baby girl off the bottom of that pool. And I lifted her up and I turned her over, and her face was now facing me, and her face was like an ashen gray, and her lips were dark purple, and my little baby wasn't breathing. My little baby was dead. And as I was holding my little girl's body in my arms, I remember crying out to God. Now remember, I didn't care about God. I didn't particularly like God. I didn't want to have anything to do with God. But when the chips got down, where did I go? To God, of course. Why? Yeah. So I'm holding my little girl's lifeless body in my arms, and I cried out to God. I don't think I did this out loud, but I can say in my heart, and I said, Lord, if you will give my daughter her life back, you can take my life. Now, I was thinking in a physical sense. And what I'm about to tell you is very theologically controversial. In fact, it's probably theologically impossible, but I stand by this. If God had put breath back in my little girl's lungs and struck me dead with a bolt of lightning at that very minute, I would have fried in hell for eternity a happy man. Now, I don't really think you can do that, but that's my story. So I cut a deal with God. I cried out to God and I cut a deal with him. Said, Lord, if you will give my daughter her life back, you can take my life. Little did I know that God had every intention of taking me up on that deal that I cut with him on the side of the pool that day. So, as I said, I learned CPR as a kid, so I put my little girl's body on the side of the pool. I turned her head sideways, cleared out her airway, and I began to give her mouth-to-mouth and chest compressions. And after what seemed like an eternity, my little girl spat the water out of her lungs and began crying. Now, I'll tell you this, my friend, and I don't know if this is theologically possible either, but I'll say it anyway. I believe that when I die and go to heaven, and I do believe that'll happen, I'm probably going to do a couple billion in purgatory, but when I do finally make it, I don't think that all the choirs of angels singing praise to God are going to sound as sweet as the sound of that little girl crying on the side of that pool that day. God gave her breath and gave her life back. Let me fast forward in the story real quickly and tell you that that little girl on the side of that pool that day, she's now the mother of my 2 grandchildren. So thanks be to God for that, huh? And by the way, when you have grandchildren, and anybody with grandchildren knows this, your children no longer become your children. They are now the mother or father of your grandchildren, right? They change roles completely. And by the way, people always ask me too, they say, well, do you have any other children? Because I tell that story and I don't really talk about my other children. Yes, we have 4 children. We have 2 girls and 2 boys. Emily, who is the little girl in the story there, is our oldest, right? She was our only child at the time. But we have 2 girls and 2 boys, and now we have 2 grandsons as well, and praying that God will bless us with a whole lot more. Thanks be to God, right? Amen? So anyway, she began to cry on the side of that pool that day, and the ambulance came. They said it took 8 minutes, but it was more like 8 days before the ambulance got there. They rushed her to the hospital. She went to the hospital, spent the night for observation, and we brought her home, and there was nothing wrong with our daughter. No ill effects at all. It was a complete and total miracle. We have no idea how long she was at the bottom of that pool, but when we brought her home, there was nothing wrong with that little baby girl. And so my wife, after we brought our baby girl home, she says to me, honey, I think we need to go to church and thank God for giving us our daughter back. So where do you think we went? To the Catholic Church, right? Why? You got it now. You got it. Of course. Because of the seeds of grace that had been planted in our lives, we knew that if we were going to go thank God for this amazing miracle that he had just done in our lives, we had to go back to the Catholic Church. And so we did. Now here's where the story gets really interesting. We go to church that Sunday, right? And now remember what had just happened to us. We go to church, and the readings were like God took a Louisville Slugger and was just boom, right over the top of my head. One thing after another. And the gospel reading at that Mass was from Luke's gospel, the story of Jairus' daughter. You familiar with that story? If you're not, let me just tell you about it. It's the story of a family. This synagogue official named Jairus comes to Jesus and he says, Lord, my little girl is sick to the point of dying. Can you please come and heal her? And Jesus says, you bet, Jai, I'm on the case. Now, you're not going to find that in the Bible, okay? I'm paraphrasing here. But for all intents and purposes, that's exactly what he said. You bet, let's go. I got this. So they start on their way to Jairus' house, right? And in the interim, a woman comes who's been bleeding for 12 years, hemorrhaging for 12 years. She touches the hem of Jesus' garment and she's healed, just like that. Then Jesus continues on his journey. Now, just before they get to Jairus' house, Jairus' servants come out and they say to Jesus, hey, Master, forget about it. I know that's a North Jersey thing, but I thought you might relate to that, okay? Hey, Jesus, forget about it, they say. The girl is already dead. And Jesus says, no, don't say that because I got a better idea. So Jesus goes into the house. I'm paraphrasing again here. Jesus goes into the house with the girl's mom and dad and Peter, James, and John. He takes her by the hand. She's laying on the bed. She's dead, okay? The little girl is dead. Jesus takes her by the hand and he says to her, Talitha kum, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise, get up. And he brings this little girl back from the dead. He brings a little girl back from the dead. Hello, Mr. Lloyd, anybody home? That was the gospel reading at that Mass. And I still didn't get it. What do you got to do? You know, I'm sure God is probably up there going, dude, what have I got to do? I still didn't get it. And Michelle. And we went right back to our own ways. We went right back to our old ways. Didn't go to church again for quite some time. Now I want to take a little pause in the story right here because this is so important. God was so wanting to plant that seed of grace in our lives and in our hearts through the readings at Holy Mass. He was speaking directly to us, and yet we didn't hear his voice. We didn't hear his voice. There's a psalm that talks about this, and our choir now is going to sing it for us. It's based on Psalm 95, and it says, if today you hear the voice of God, harden not your hearts.